Good morning, good afternoon from wherever you are joining. So excited to be having another SheMoney LinkedIn Live. I am Jackie Zahner. I want to welcome you to the call. I am here in Park City, Utah, in my full Western stage of life. So if you see some horses and other paraphernalia in the background, that is my current state of being here in the great state of Utah. I just want to give everyone a minute to join. This is also being recorded, so we really appreciate anyone who is joining live today. Thank you for joining us. I know your time is so precious. And for those of you who are watching this after the fact, welcome as well. And want to just invite you, if you feel comfortable, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We welcome your comments and your questions. I have a whole team here at SheMoney at our offices in Park City that are going to be monitoring the chat as we have a discussion today and pulling in your questions. So I am insanely excited about this conversation today. I hope you have, and if you haven't, don't worry, we'll be covering a lot of the bases. Read my most recent SheMoney newsletter on this topic of financial parenting. And as I said in the newsletter, and if you haven't yet subscribed, please do. And please share our newsletter widely. It actually reaches 170,000 people, if you can believe that. So we're so grateful. And it's not, you don't have to pay for it. It's not a sponsored newsletter. So we want to get as many people as possible reading it. But it goes into a lot of detail, and we really want to expand on that conversation today with our amazing guest speaker. So allow me to introduce Joline Godfrey. So Joline Godfrey is truly an OG in the financial education world with a focus on families and children. In 2003, she wrote this landmark book, Raising Financially Fit Kids, which I discovered when my own kids were very small, and I was looking for support in how I teach money to my own children. So needless to say, I don't like to say I stalked her, but I kind of did. I did track her down early in the early 2000s, ended up having a series of events with Joline back then, and we have been connected ever since. And she was, in fact, a speaker at our SheMoney Summit just a couple of years ago. Today, she's the founder and CEO of Bounce 10, an immersive play-based financial readiness program for families and children built around her framework, which she likes to call FISH, financial, intellectual, social, and human capital. She's truly one of my favorite people and has influenced so much of my journey with money for me personally, with families, and what we do at SheMoney. So please welcome Joline Godfrey.
Nice to see you, Jackie. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you, Joline. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today. We've received already so much great feedback on the newsletter, and we're going to cover a lot of ground today. And again, I've encouraged people already to post questions in the chat, but let's just anchor it in who you are and a little bit about your journey, because you have been in this work a long time. And I don't know if there's a single moment where you claimed that this is my world around financial parenting, but it has been your life's work for a considerable amount of time. So give us a little background and let's get to know Joline.
Well, I am trained as a clinical social worker, not a financial advisor. So I come to this work from a different lens, a different point of view. But I think I will fast forward to 2003. By then I had done a whole lot of things in my career, was really on a kind of path, I guess, as a social worker when Inc. magazine asked me to interview women entrepreneurs. And it was early 2000s, women weren't getting covered in the press all that much. And so I went out and did a series of interviews with women all across the country. And when I finished those, the question I was left with was, what would have been different in those women's lives had somebody talked to them about money when they were little girls? And that was really the question that put me on the path I am, because it turns out that most people don't talk to any of us about money until we're so-called grown-ups. By then, we're baked, and we're also feeling behind the curve, if you will, because so much of what we needed to know about money, you need to know early. So I would say that the last, 20 odd years has been a quest to begin to get families to think about starting a conversation with the children in their households much earlier to prepare them for what it means to be an economic being, not just in the nature of money, but in terms of their intellectual capital, their social capital, and their human capital. So, long-winded way of saying I fell into this by accident and just have not been able to leave it because it seems so critical to how do we take care of ourselves? How do we stay resilient? How do we stay confident? Money is at the core of all too many things.
Yeah, and it so resonates. I know you know this with my own story of why SheMoney. In fact, just last night I spoke at an event and they were saying why SheMoney is at an early age too. I mean, my childhood, and I'll bring that in, but also at Goldman Sachs and later, just how
Yeah.
fundamentally important understanding money and being able to engage with financial resources is for your overall well-being. And I'm going to post some facts in the chat, or I should say Jillian is, but just to anchor what you're saying even today, 49% is the average score US adults received on basic financial literacy questions. And I hate the term literacy. We're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
And 59% of parents said they don't feel fully confident having financial conversations with their children. So this topic is so important. And obviously the reason we're having this conversation today. But let's start actually at this sort of get into a little bit of definitions as we start. And you talk about describe what you say is financial fluency, which is a term I love, versus literacy, and then bridge that into what is financial parenting.
Great. Yeah, there's something about financial literacy that makes me always feel as though you're trying to get really smart kids and women and people to understand math or understand numbers. And fluency is an ability to read the article about the economics of sports, to talk with somebody about interest rates, to just be able to be an economic human being with general awareness of how money affects your life, which is different from being literate about how to balance your checkbook. So I like the term fluency because it's bigger, it's a little more fluid, literally. I think it gives people permission to think about the topic in a bigger way. That connects to that problem you just mentioned, which is most people don't feel equipped to talk about money. And in part, it's because they come to it too late and because it's been mystified in so many ways, which is why now we go to financial parenting. But what I began to understand, and I realized I was writing about this in 2014, so this was 12 years ago now. I first used the term financial parenting to talk about the fact that you can put a kid through a class. And it turns out the research tells us that retention of financial education classes is about 6 months. And the reason is that financial fluency comes from sitting around the table with your mother and father, or mother or father, or mother and mother, grandparents, aunts and uncles, but it is with the family to talk about what happens in your economic life. It is a way to bring vocabulary and financial values into your life that's relevant to you. It is, again, a very personal thing. You're not going to get that usually from a class, whereas over time, you will have these conversations continuously and repeatedly in a family, and you will walk away from that family experience as a more economically knowledgeable and confident human being. And I'm going to, you should interrupt me, Jackie, at any time because you know I can go on.
Yes.
But there's one story I think that tells this very nicely. For years, I used to give a talk at the Harvard Business School alumni reunion. At the end of the talk, I'd have this long line of people, and I would initially think, oh, this is fun. They want to ask me more questions. No, they were there, one adult after another, and they would begin with something like, my mother always used to say, or my grandfather always told me. And I would hear this over and over until finally it got through my thick head that what people were telling me was what their family had nagged them about as children, that had become part of their character. So the rest of that sentence was things like, I really had to live within my means. I really had to save. I really had to. And I remembered my own childhood and my own family who would say the same thing over and over. And I'm sure as a kid, I didn't want to listen and it was completely resistant to. And yet, that's financial parenting. It is financial grandparenting. It is the messages you hear in the context of your everyday life continuously.
Yeah.
And the last little story I'll tell to make that point is a while ago, a grandmother said to me, Jolene, I'm trying to do I'm reading this book about money with my 5-year-old, but he has the attention span of a gnat. I can't get him to pay attention. It's like 15 minutes and that's it. What I said to her and what I say to this audience is, what you have as an advantage as a parent or a grandparent is continuity. I don't care if you only have 5 minutes with that kid or 15. You have that 15 minutes over time for a number of years. It accumulates. And that will be the kid who shows up in that line and says to me, my grandmother always used to.
Yeah.
So that's a very long story to say grandparenting is whatever you can get dripped into your life by your family members.
Yes, and just to stretch a bit, just from my own experience with that, and I talk about that a lot. And I think, like you said, it's not about what's a definition and let's quiz you on, let you understand what GDP is or inflation or interest rates or all of the things. It's money is so intricate for our lives. I mean, just going shopping,
Yeah.
right? Like, and being
Right.
in the grocery store. And my dad, I don't know if you know this, but worked in a grocery store, then owned a grocery store, and I was a cashier. And
Ah,
I was, it was my playground. My mom would go in. It used to be when they were closed on Sundays, and literally handwrite the signs that would be posted on the specials. We're talking about early 1970s. And we would used to have to stamp prices. So I grew up so aware of the economics of a
yeah.
family. Like, I would see what's on special, we would talk about it, and then I became a cashier. I would memorize prices of milk, and I don't really think of that as influencing my decision to study finance or economics. But I just realized that the money piece of it and what it costs to even live was such
Right.
an intricate part of my life, because that's, kind of was my playground, and we talked about it, and my dad would talk about it. But this idea that money is not, you don't learn about money from a textbook. We're engaging in financial transactions all day, financial decision making, trade-offs, and just talking about it. And we're going to get to like what to talk about and how to talk about it. But it's everywhere in our lives all the time. And that's the
Yeah.
memory thing, right? It's not like what's
Yeah.
written down. It's like we were in the store and we decided we're going to wait for something to go on sale, or
Yes.
all the things. So I love that term that you used, and we're going to talk about the age to start. But you use that term already, which I love, which is the drip, 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 the micro
Right.
teachings that organically into family, right? So just expand
Yes.
a little bit more on that topic, because that's something that I remember, like drip, drip, drip. Like, don't think of it as an event, think of it as like that thing that's always present.
It's always present and it's there in the background all the time. And I often say it's a little bit like water on stone. You have to, when you're dripping information about money on your kid, you will not know if it's having an impact until they are 20 odd years old. And you have to have faith. The drip, drip, drip matters. And just recently, I had an email from a family with a 7-year-old, and we had done some things, and the family had immersed these kids in some very fun activities. And they came back and said, oh my God, drip, drip, drip really happens. And I realize it's a little bit like marketing 101, repeat, repeat, repeat. It is how our brains take information in. And so it may be a story you read here, it may be a trip to the market there. It is whatever you can be engaged with your children with. And I think it is engagement that is the key notion here. And it is also this notion of micro moments that you just referred to. I don't need you to give a sermon to a kid. In fact, I would beg you not to give a sermon to a kid. I want you to drip these little stories, these little experiences in a way that accumulate over time. And that drip, drip, drip is the most effective thing you can do, whether you are an uncle, an aunt, a grandparent, or a parent. And I do say some of the most unsung heroines of family are aunts, and some of the most unsung heroes in families are uncles, because they too give messages to kids. So if you can get on kind of on the same uh, looped in message as a family in the extended family with aunts, uncles, and cousins, you have this echo chamber that is bringing in these values and messages that will make a difference over time. It's pretty exciting, really.
It is, and it's something to be. I always talk about money as intention. When you start to see it, give it attention to it, and then set intention. On some of the activities. So one of the things, many things I love about your book, and what hit me so hard 20 plus years ago, is that you really take a developmental framework. And
Yeah,
you really advocate, around starting young. Certainly dripping, your kids are getting messages, but talk about sort of this age thing, because I think, unlike kids might get one financial literacy class, senior in high school. I actually had a
right.
woman interview me from the local high school the other day, and I said, did you ever have a financial literacy class? And she's actually, I'm doing it now. And then we talked about how awful it was. Well, she didn't say that. She said it wasn't necessarily helpful. But you advocate for, drip drip, but also your book takes a real developmental approach. So talk about
Right.
how you created that. And of course, that's anchored in the work that you do now at Bounce 10. But talk about
Right.
the framework, because this is also, it's more than drip, 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 right? You can be way
It
more
is.
intentional about this.
Yes, we take it for granted that children learn to walk and talk very early on, and it turns out it is the same with becoming an economic human being. So children are already learning economic concepts from you from the this is going to be a little scary, but from the time of about 18 months. They are watching you, they are mimicking you, they are hearing you. And so whether you intend to or not, you are already giving economic lessons. So what we do now is really work with families to capture children's attention through play. Remember that play is the work of children. And we don't want you to give a lesson in cash flow or spreadsheets, but we do want you to begin to think about some concepts of sharing, for example, is an economic idea. Um, Taking turns is an economic idea. One of my favorite books is called The Table Where the Rich People Live.
Mm.
And for an 8-year-old, it turns out the heroine in this story is an 8-year-old who sits at the table one morning and tells her mother that she and her dad need to get better jobs because they need more money. And the rest of the book is all about the mom and the dad talking about the time they have to go hiking and what they see in the sky. And what is the cost then of having that time to go hiking as a family? What do they get out of it? And what do you think that's worth? What they're doing in this storybook for little kids is introducing the notion of human capital, which is another aspect of what it means to have wealth, to have access to economic ideas, so that kids are very early on making trade-offs between, well, what do we need for money and what do we need for time? How is it we're going to spend our time? And that notion of spending then is an economic concept, but parents and families can talk about it in a way that transcends just cash, if you will. Um, so using play as the vehicle and storybooks and games and activities that we've been developing at Bounce, actually, we're able to give parents better tools for engaging with kids that go beyond, here kids, you have to, just save every penny. We do want them to save, we do want them to put money aside, but we want to frame that in a way that speaks to who they are, what their values are, what's important to them, not just how much money are you going to accumulate and hold on to, for the future, but what are your values around economics in this family?
Yeah.
It's
Sorry.
so no, so that's where you start with very little kids. I will say that very quickly you go on to tweens, or that 10 to 11 and 12-year-old. You remember, we all see that's when the lemonade stand comes up. It's because children's curiosity around money is growing so rapidly, and they want to be young entrepreneurs, so they want to make money. And one of the things I'd caution family members about is try not to say, "Oh, isn't that cute?" Try not to just buy everything for them and then let them go out and sell and keep all the money. Use that as a lesson in what does it cost to make lemonade, and what are you going to charge, and what are you going to hold on to, and what are you going to give away, and what are you going to save. Those entrepreneurial urges, when kids are in that developmental stage, the tween world, happens to be another really important stage to pay attention to. And then, of course, by the time they're teens, you don't want them to be out there just thinking that, I talk about allowance 2.0. It's where children have allowances, but they also often have invisible allowances, and that is what families subsidize.
Mhm.
If a kid doesn't understand that the cost of those athletic shoes or the cost of the lessons they're taking, they don't understand the level to which they are subsidized. And right in those teen years, when they're trying to sort out their identity and trying to figure out who they are, it's a really helpful time to really see what the cost of their lifestyle is, and what the choices are that they can make, and what the values are, and the reality of your family is. So it is a stepping stone. If in fact you don't start talking to kids about money until they're 18, they're making things up. They're taking things from the world and making decisions that are less influenced by parents and families, much more influenced by peers and influencers. So each of those steps is a stepping stone on the way to fluency. And it can be an adventure. It doesn't have to be just a chore that families dread. So
Yeah.
that's how
No,
I.
and I love it so much. And this is not going to show up, but I'm going to say why I love this book. In your book, which is,
Ah,
no one's going to see that, but you have the basic money
mm,
skill, how to save, how to get paid what you're worth, how to spend wisely, how to talk about money, and it broken down by an age appropriate way to approach it, right? Which is, again,
yes.
years ago, I'm like, bam, like it makes so much sense because, and you think about that in terms of how we're not taught about money. And yet, if we want to learn to play the piano, we're going to learn from the basics. We're going to, what to expect when you're expecting, you're going to read the book.
Right.
Yeah, like this to me, literally, this is a strong word, but I'm still going to use it. It was like a Bible, right? Of this topic. It really is. And I
Well,
know, and you're not, I have no commission here. Jolene is not paying me to say this. I just, I just mean it's so smart, and it was so smart 20 plus years ago. And it pisses me off. Sorry, I'm going to use a little aggressive language here, that we have
yes.
the stats that we talked about in terms of the state of the world with financial education. And there is so much money, right, that goes into financial education by states, by nonprofits, and I'm not, that isn't, doesn't take this approach. And it makes
It
me
makes me,
wild,
oh, it makes me
wild.
crazy. It
Oh,
makes me totally crazy because it plays out even today in the lives of teenage girls who, when they go for their first babysitting, some of them are getting quite savvy and they will overcharge. But so many girls will still say, "Oh, you can just pay me whatever you want." So that skill of being able to get paid what
negotiating
you're
your way.
worth,
Yeah.
women are still struggling with that. So, yes, you and I share this sort of outrage that we don't know how to quell, because it's been so hard to get people to think developmentally about money. And
Yeah.
I guess it is because most financial education is offered by people who are trained brilliantly in math and finance, but that has nothing to do with education and developmental understanding. So I do feel like finally I am making a tiny bit of headway, but not as fast and not as much as I'd like, because this is survival. This is how you take care of yourself and your family.
Yeah.
You've got to understand financial fluency. So,
Yeah. And so coincidentally, my daughter is home for a minute and doing a clean out, Jolene. And I found this from her childhood that she decided to get rid of. And it says save, spend, give. Isn't
I
that
love
cute?
this. It's
And
lovely.
I'll let her get rid of this because this is, I'm going to put it up on my
Good.
shelf here. But back to the allowance thing just for a minute, because you always said, which stuck with me, allowance is a tool to help kids learn about money. That's what it is. It's
It
not a
is.
reward, it's a tool.
Right.
And I think of all the messages I sometimes ask my kids that they got that in their head. And I would say more broadly with the SheMoney framework, which I know you know, but we talk about the 7 things you can do with your money:
Yes.
save, spend, give, but also earn, invest, borrow, protect, and no, that's the
Right.
7. I got them all. But there were
Right.
so many, like if I were to do what you did around, oh, maybe I should do this, and again, less developmentally, but we have sort of mapped out around all of these things. What are some of the behaviors? What are some of the key concepts in all of those buckets? And then bring them
Right.
to life through stories and experiences. I think, again, financial education is just how we're doing it and why I'm lifting up you. And we had a previous session with Chantel Chapman around the trauma of
Mhm.
money as well. And there's so much intersection in the work that you do and the work that she does.
Yeah.
That's so compelling because there's such a deeper, richer, more important, relevant, timely story, because financial wellness there's an epidemic of the opposite, especially with the affordability of modern life. So
Yes.
I want to talk to you a little bit I want to jump, because I mentioned Chantel, sort of this emotional undercurrent that's always present when we talk about money. And I think in today's environment, of course, it's a spectrum. There are folks that are, have certainly do not have enough to even cover basic needs. And then there's extreme wealth on the other side of it and everything in between. But I think there's a desire for parents to protect on
Yeah.
both sides, protect when they don't have enough and there's so much financial stress that they're freaked out and scared. Dad and mom lost their job. They have an unexpected vet bill or whatever that might threaten the ability to pay for things. So let's talk a little bit about sort of the emotion behind it and how, as a parent on maybe both those extremes, because you've worked with folks across the spectrum of wealth, how you would share, some of what people are likely to be experiencing, let's say on different ends of that spectrum, in terms of the economic reality of parents today.
So I've been paying a lot of attention lately to this spectrum, if you will, of scarcity mindset on the one side and abundance mindset on the other. And it began to puzzle me why people who had so much money, literally billionaires, would be living in a scarcity mindset brain state, which assumes that there's not enough. I have to get as much for myself as I can. I have to worry about money at every single moment. Whereas there are families with far less who live in a kind of abundance mindset, and they are healthier, less scared, less fearful, and find ways to make their lives work. Now, I do not for a moment think that you're better off being poor with an abundance mindset than to be with a scarcity mindset and a lot of money. Let us be clear. But I think it's really important to begin to understand those two approaches to the world, because the scarcity mindset does set people up to feel powerless and afraid and to feel like everybody's out to get them. The abundance mindset families really begin to look at, what are my opportunities? How do I take advantage of them? How can I really build my fluency in such a way and begin to feel greater control? And it is that feeling out of control of money and resources that is so painful and so real in this current economic state we're all in. So I put that out there to say that's the environment, that is a context, and we all need to be mindful of it. The other piece, though, go
Can
ahead.
I say one thing on that? Because we just literally last week had a session with Chantel Chapman here on, it was on the human-centered financial methods, who are working mainly with financial advisors and
Right.
therapists looking to understand more. It's bigger than the emotional part of money, but the brain. So we're talking a lot about the neuroscience behind
Yes.
scarcity, and and there's real and perceived, but your brain can't necessarily differentiate. And what she says, which I think is true, and I am sure you would agree with, when you are in that scarcity mindset, your amygdala is hijacked. You have a fight or
Right.
flight and a mind thing, and it challenges your executive functioning. We all know this. And
Right.
I want to talk a bit later about what happens around death and divorce, because when things happen that create an incredible emotional trauma is the time we have to make the biggest financial decisions of our life, right? Like that's
Yep.
just something to acknowledge. But what Chantel's work is really anchored in part in really understanding what happens from a neuroscience perspective and
Yep.
understanding the impact of, and she would say the word scarcity can be substituted for the word trauma. If
Hmm.
people say, I don't experience trauma, well, do you experience scarcity, real or perceived? I think
Right.
everyone would say yes. So there's a similar response to that. So just you saying that and saying you can experience scarcity, whether or not it's real, you can have
Right.
trauma, lots of forms of that. And all of that is operating in the backdrop of our minds and our family systems. So
Yes.
it's a whole nother topic, but I just wanted
Thank
to
you.
you. High five.
No, I'm so glad you jumped in on that because it's real.
Yeah.
And it is why this fish construct we have created has emerged as a kind of antidote to all of this. So, if in fact your scarcity mindset and that fearfulness is around, I don't have enough money, no matter how much, I don't know what I'm going to do, if you are not training your brain to think about your intellectual capital and how you leverage that, your social capital, your connections, and how you leverage those, not just transactionally, but as real relationships, how do you build on your social network in a way that enlarges your life? And your human capital, how do you leverage your human capital? In my own case, I had this amazing grandfather who just once said to me, Jolene, you can't take things out of a community unless you put things back in. That wisdom just altered the path of my life. I don't assume I can ever take anything out of a community without a kind of contractual understanding. It's my job to put stuff back in. So this fish concept we have created is intended to open up the world, to give you other sources of abundance, if you will, that you can build on and launch in a way to ease that sense of powerlessness, to ease that anxiety or the trauma that she talks about. Because if you don't have a way or an antidote to that trauma or to the scarcity mindset, you are stuck with it and you will feel depressed. It's interesting that I think this also transcends gender. What we see in girls is that girls and women, they are frequently underestimated and we assume they just don't know anything. And we assume they aren't powerful in a way that is economically viable. It's interesting that that then determines some of the policy making and legislation that go towards women. In the case of boys, we overestimate what they know. We overassume what they know. And in order to kind of live up to, oh, I guess I'm supposed to know this, we don't give them what they need either. So, what I'm seeing in our work with young kids is that we have to transcend gender and make sure that we are encouraging girls and also acknowledging for boys that there are things they need too. And it's been an interesting journey for me powerful feminist that I am, and concerned about the needs of girls and women in a very real way. But I have become more compassionate about how boys are not encouraged to ask for what they need because it's a sense of shame. So if there is trauma and anxiety for girls, there is shame for boys. And figuring that out in this journey of financial confidence is really a family systems thing, but for both your boys and your girls, they need different things. And shame, I think, is one that we don't pay attention to enough for young boys.
Oh, I think shame, and I want to come back to this spectrum of resource question, but this is too important not to double click. I hate when I say that, and I say it all the time, on this question of shame. And interestingly, the tagline for Trauma of Money is decrease shame, increase discernment. And I'm also
Right.
obsessed with the work of Brene Brown, who is known as the shame researcher, because when
Yep.
shame is present, it keeps things in the closet. It keeps you from asking for what you need. And a lot of the work, I think, around money, and again, it bridges your work and Chantel's and mine so beautifully, is saying, look, when it comes to money, none of us have it figured out. We probably weren't taught about it. There's not a destination, it's a journey. There's endless things to learn, to grow, and your circumstances are dynamic. So every day is a different day for your financial being. You make decisions, and the best place and time to start, thinking about money and being more intentional about it is right now. And that's why we're so event-based in a lot of what we do, is because shame comes away in community. When you can share your stories, and that's one thing we encourage people to do, even within families. Families don't talk about money.
Right.
Is you decrease shame when you're willing to talk about things and acknowledge things you've done well and not. And that's the thing about money, is those things. If there's a lot of shame present, there's not a lot of growth. And the more you decrease shame, the more you can increase well-being, not just financial well-being.
Right.
So,
Right.
but let's talk about the spectrum issue a little bit in terms of, you have the term, which I think is fascinating, which I love. I'm obsessed with the whole thing about, I don't know when I understood what gaslighting is, but as soon as I really got it, I see it everywhere.
Yes. Yes.
And gaslighting is making people feel like they're crazy, like not acknowledging what's true and especially emotionally true for them. But you use the phrase wealth gaslighting as well. And when parents either hide abundance or deny struggle. And I think that's connected into our current economic environment, also always true, right?
Yep.
And there's so many narratives about hidden stories around money and wealth, and you want to protect people by not telling them things. But, weave that into this conversation about the spectrum of, struggle and abundance in terms of financial resources, and bring in that term, because I find that term so powerful.
I work with families all the time who will say, my kids don't know anything about our money situation.
I really want to get you some water, Joline. If I was across from you, you have some? Okay.
I have some. Hang on.
Okay.
Be with you in a moment.
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. I live in one of the driest climates in North America. I have to constantly drink.
Strange. One of the things we know is that parents think their kids know a whole lot less than they do. And most kids know how much Zillow thinks your house is worth. Kids are able to find out all kinds of things financially that their parents don't want to acknowledge they know. And so the gaslighting comes from a parent saying, no, that's not how much. You don't know. You're too young. You can't know that. But kids are both much more tuned in. They have access to the internet. 6-year-olds are going on Zillow and finding out how much their neighbor's house is worth. 6-year-olds are figuring out who in their classroom has money and who doesn't. I mean, this is happening really early. So when a parent says my kid doesn't know anything, I just roll my eyes these days, because financial self-defense in some ways is a parent being present for a kid to help them figure out what exactly are the economic circumstances of their lives and what are the values. For kids who will say to a parent, why can't I have that? I know you can afford it. If a parent really cannot afford something, but they're pretending they can, the kid is going to keep pushing. And it doesn't help that child to not have some context for where the parent is coming from and why they're making this statement about what a kid can or can't have. When a kid is growing up in enormous abundance and the kid says, why can't I have that because we can afford it? And the parent doesn't say something like, just because we can doesn't mean we should.
My favorite line, by the way.
I know, mine too. And it is again a way that you advance your values in the family, and you tell a kid, here's our expectations. Here's where we think we need to be placing value on what we spend money on and where we don't. We want to give a little bit more money away, so we're not going to spend all this money. The kids who come home and they want the $5,000 purse, for example. It's like, yeah, sure, we can afford that $5,000 purse, but we could also put that $5,000 into a fund for, you name it, sick animals, for God's sakes. And so I think the gaslighting you talk to is when kids don't understand their true context, they're not having a real conversation with their families. And so they begin to sense this state of distrust, if you will. Can I trust myself? Or worse, can I trust my parent to be truthful with me? And that is different from a parent does not have to reveal the full portfolio of the family. You do not have to open the books on what the full cost of your life is. Ron Lieber, who's one of my favorite New York Times writers about money, um, talks about when his own kid came and said, how much do you make, Dad? And his response was, well, I know you're curious about that, and it's information that I don't mind you having, but you're not ready for that information yet. We'll spend the next year having conversations about cost of living and salaries and how you get there and all of the things that lead up to it. And then I'll share with you that information. That respects a kid. That says it's not that you can't have this information, but you need to learn. You need to live in a world in which you understand. If I tell you I'm making, whether it's 100 or 200,000 or whatever it is, if you as a child don't understand what that 100,000 or 200,000 or 50,000 covers, you don't have a sense of really what it means in your family. So, fluency, back to that word, is really an understanding of what does this all cover and what does it mean about our lifestyle? What does it mean about our values, about where the money goes? In some ways, this is one of the most exciting conversations a family can have. I mean, I keep saying recently, I am so pro family because I think if you can learn these things in the context of family, it makes you a better civic citizen. It makes you a better member of your community, which makes you a better member of your state and a better member of your country. I think family is such an important laboratory for learning our values and our economic lessons. And if families can engage in that, it can be so fun and such an adventure. It does not have to be this terrifying, traumatic experience. It can just be something you do together as a family, like you may go hiking. But in this case, you have a money conversation. And back to this little book, The Table Where the Rich People Sit, it's such a great demonstration of how just a warm, real conversation in your family can empower children and can empower family members in a way that makes a difference. So the trauma and the shame people feel, I feel, is so needless. And it's so destructive. It makes me really sad because it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, it makes me sad too. I mean, and it's present everywhere. I mean, I
Yeah.
think so much, and how much pain there is, around money. There
Oh,
is just a
yeah.
lot of pain about having not enough, too much, what you should have done, the opportunities missed. And I think there's always that woulda, coulda, shoulda with money that is, you woulda, coulda, shoulda yourself into, or
Right, right,
missed.
right,
And that
right.
gets into what can I do today, and developing, and moving forward in that way.
Yeah.
So I want to, I mean, you address some of these things about, trying to decrease fear, increase discernment, being more intentional. We talk through it. Um, I'm going to ask you this question. For parents who are genuinely stretched thin right now, what would you say to someone who feels like they can't be a good financial parent unless they have their own financial house in order? And this gets into, I can't teach it because I don't know it myself. And I always say, when we do a lot of events for women, and I'll often hear I'm not good with money, and I'm like, well, what's the evidence of that? Well, I don't have a lot, and I'm like, okay, but do you budget? Do you actually figured out how to get a job? Do you not have debt? Like all of those, the bigger, it's not being good with money is not about having a lot of money, right? It's about all the other things.
Right.
So speak to this because I do think there is so much back to the shame piece, so much fear and shame with parents that they don't have it all figured out. They're hiding, so therefore it's just avoidant. And we spoke a little bit about that already, but if you can just drill down a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
This is where I think the greatest opportunity is co-learning with parent and child. And every time somebody calls about their own as an adult and they want financial education of some sort, I will say, are there any children in your family? Do you have a kid? Do you have a niece? Do you have a grandchild? And if they do, I'm all over it because in the teaching of a little kid, you literally start at the beginning. And in that way, the anxiety of an adult immediately goes down because they can feel some mastery over starting at the beginning. I will always remember, I think it was around 2006 or seven, I was doing a talk in Los Angeles, and my book had been out for a couple of years, and I was doing this talk. This guy came up to me, and I could tell he was probably 30 or so. And he had my book in his hands and he walked up and he said, this is what I want. I want you to start right here with me. And what he was saying is, I want to start at the beginning because I've missed all that and I just don't feel confident about anything I do, but I have responsibilities. And I love this guy. I worked with him for a very long time. And what I have seen is that any parent or grandparent or aunt and uncle I can get to pair up with a little kid and give them instructions for what to teach that little kid, I get them on board immediately. And I think it is a very overlooked strategy for beginning financial education. We throw people into the middle of a French novel, for example, and expect them to read it without giving them the "Je m'appelle Joline." My name is Joline. You have to begin at the beginning. So I use the co-learning notion or strategy as often as I can. And I think, you go back to your seven skills or my 10 skills, which overlap. What we're trying to say to people is this does not have to be a mystery. This does not have to be Nobel Prize winning knowledge. This is your life. And we're going to take it apart in a more granular way and give you the confidence to go at this over time. You're not going to get it in a week or 6 months. This is a process that takes you through your journey. This is a lifelong process. Don't feel bad if it takes 6 months or 16 months or 16 years. You are evolving. And I think it is that journey notion that I love about financial education and financial parenting, which is different from feeling I've got to take this 6-week class and get an A, and then I still don't know what I'm doing, and now I feel really stupid, um, which is very
Yes.
discouraging. So I really do feel like kidnapping a child and co-learning with them is the way to go these days.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm still doing that all the time with my kids. And there's so many influences, right? You talk a
Yes.
lot about this, and I have a couple questions I'm going to get to from the chat in just a second. but two things I want to hit on first. One is, okay, all kids and adults are getting lessons now from social media in a way that they've never
Right.
had before. And I think there's good social media and there's like questionable, especially the whole girl math thing that went on for a while made me kind of wild. But
Yeah.
speak about that. And also the question is, AI now in these tools a friend or foe in your view, with respect to, I would say, not just financial engagement and education
Everything.
of kids, but parents. So speak to those two things quickly. And I have one more question, and then we'll close out with a couple questions from the chat.
Okay. Really quickly on AI. Um, AI is both friend and foe. But I think in the family, if you have kids for whom everything is invisible, they end up flat. If they are not developing fluency, knowledge, confidence, skills, and they just think, I'll let AI take care of it, they will always be uneasy about what they don't know. Because if you don't know what you don't know, you don't know. And so I use AI. I think AI is going to be a very powerful and helpful tool for all of us. But I also know when I need to get my own learning in place. So I understand what's happening. I can see the speed of what's happening, but I do need the fundamentals. I do need the basics. And I think families need to be mindful and discerning of where they apply artificial intelligence and where they really require kids to at least know their basics. So it's a much more complicated topic, obviously, but that's my beginning state. You've got to know something.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I have a lot of hope with AI in delivering personalized financial support, because it is, ultimately the value of that comes in it, especially as an adult, more so in the kid. Like, I agree, you got to learn the basics, and the basics come alive in experience and storytelling and values, not just in definitions. So, but I think it's going to be really interesting how AI impacts, I would say, the overall money wealth management industry. I think we're just starting to see a hint of that. So one more thing that I want to tag back to, because I think I mentioned to you before we started our call that I've been reading this book, Strangers, which is a New York Times bestseller. It's called A Memoir for a Marriage, and it's about a woman's story of Belle Burden, I think her name is, about her husband leaving her. And it's ultimately, it's a story about marriage and end of marriage and what she thought was true and not true, but it had a huge financial component to it. Huge.
Interesting.
But it speaks to that what can be very defining in families' overall financial picture is events, a death, divorce, illness. And I'm just curious if there's any quick thoughts about, rather than this drip, drip, perpetual thing, like just thoughts about when there's a dramatic change in financial circumstance brought on by a life event. How does that show up in your work? And do you have any just quick words on that? It's a very big topic, but it's something that's just been sitting with me after reading this book.
This is a much bigger conversation. We should have started it earlier. But there's a difference between pathology and culture in families and in coupledom. And what I see all too often is that when things go wrong financially, it is often owned by one or both of the parties. As something is wrong with me or something is wrong with the other person, they're a compulsive spender, or they've left me alone, or there's something wrong in the individual. Versus as a couple or as a family, we've built this culture around money that is not effective for both of us. And this really is a much bigger conversation that perhaps we can have at another time. But I see this all the time when families and individuals are not discerning the difference between the pathology or the psychology of the individual around money versus the culture of the family and even the extended family over time around money. And if you can't sort those two things out, you will misdiagnose what is going on, and that will have all kinds of negative impacts on the individual as well as the system of that family. So yeah, I don't know about this, but I'm going to go read it now.
Yeah, it's an interesting book. And doing so much work with women in particular can be deeply impacted by events. And women, of course, you know this, it's anchor of your work experience, have
Yeah.
financial lives are very differently. They often leave the workforce with kids. There's a big motherhood penalty, and if they have to come back into the workforce, that's a huge issue, often delegate financial responsibility. So, yeah, I feel
I
like
know.
after this book, I think I want to do a session with you and maybe Chantel, on this book,
Yeah.
if we decide to read it.
Well,
What
I'm going to go read it right after I get off this. So
Oh
this is
gosh. Okay. Well,
excellent.
I'm gonna highlight. I just learned that there is something called book talk on TikTok where people take their favorite things in a book and
Ah,
kind of vent on it. So you might find me there because there is
excellent.
lots of
Okay.
highlighting. So two more questions, and we'll end with a little talking about next steps and how to engage with your work with Bounce 10. But what is the number? I hate reducing it, but I also love it. What is the number one message that you will
Ah.
recommend to repeat and repeat to kids and the family? Carolyn, thank you for that question around money. Like, I hate to reduce it to one takeaway, but if someone was walking away from this today, with one big message, maybe it's drip, drip, drip already, but
Well, drip, drip, drip is certainly a big one, but the other one is do hard things. And I say that because so many people really shy away from dealing with their financial lives. And what I say to, I've had families say to me, so, do I have to not go to a nice hotel to tell my kid to be responsible? And I will say, go to that nice hotel. But while you're there, make sure you go on a really hard hike. And if the kid says, I'm just too tired. I don't want to finish. That we need to take a taxi home. You make that kid walk all the way back because what we know is that resilience and confidence comes from endurance and doing hard things and mastery. And if you are rescuing kids and not being truthful with them about the financial issues of your family, you are not giving them a chance to develop resilience and mastery. That is robbing children of potential that I think is unfair. So this business of what's the one thing, have your kid do hard things, and I don't say that as a non-loving person. I love children and I'm deeply compassionate, but doing hard things is critical.
yeah, I think that's something. I think the dream, I think most parents would say, I want enough financial resources, right, to be able to make my kids' lives better.
Easy.
And better doesn't mean easy. And I think
Right.
that I've tripped up on that. If I could go back in time, there are certainly things I would do differently. But it comes back to acknowledge that. Like, I've grown
Right.
kids now, so I'm like, wow, I think I did that well. I did think I didn't do this well. What do you think? What have you learned? And ask your kids
Perfect.
if they're older, right?
Yep.
To what do you think you learned from us about money or didn't learn? And how is that showing up for you now? And it's just like being curious about it and having dialogue,
Yes.
especially with kids of all ages, like even asking a little kid, like
Yes.
questions about money. So let me just close out with this, Jolene. We want to stop at the top of the hour. So first of all, so much gratitude, but now you're doing Bounce 10. You've got the book. Like, how do people connect with you? How do they learn more? You have tons of resources on your website. So just do a little
We do.
sharing, post things in the chat as well. And I just refer back to the article I wrote, which is full of all the links
Oh,
with
good.
this topic. But final words from you, Jolene.
Okay, two things to look for. One is you can get to Bounce and learn more about it by www.bounce-10.com. And you can be in touch with me and we can chat, and I'm pretty accessible. However, there's one more thing that I want to recommend, and it is an article I published recently called it's just financial parenting, but it's on a website that is open to anybody. And if you Google J Hughes, Hughes, hidden gems, a hidden gem there is this article on financial parenting, and it's pretty new. It hasn't been there very long, but I think it speaks to financial parenting in a way that's quite accessible. And I'm really delighted they published this for me. So go there and take a look at that too.
Oh, great. Well, we'll find that posted in the chat. I'll also
Great.
link to it. If you love this topic, please send it. It's going to exist on LinkedIn, on our YouTube channel as well. It's this was live, but obviously it's recorded as well. And Joline, I just want to thank you. I mean, I look back and so many things are showing up for me in my head, but you and I connected almost 25 years
20.
ago. All right. Like,
Oh my God. Yes.
and we're
What a
still in each
journey.
other's lives.
I
Journey,
know.
babe, journey. You're one of my favorite people. I thank you for your work. I thank you for the fierce
Likewise.
feminist that you are too. In these times, your
Oh,
work is not only it's for everyone and families, but I also know
it's
that
for
you have a
everybody.
gender lens to your work, which I appreciate. So thank
Yeah.
you everyone for joining us today. And Joline, thank you, and a big heartfelt, heart to heart love for you and your work. And I
Back
wish
to you.
everyone a wonderful day. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.